Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
I decided to share my story on the internet, specifically on YouTube, where you are watching this video. I think from the title of the video, you know what story I'm going to tell you. To give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, we're going to go back 2 years. My wife's name is Amanda. She was 26 years old at the time. My name is Jake. I'm 25 years old. At the time, we're experiencing difficulties in our marriage. We had just turned our lives around and moved across the country to a brand new city. It wasn't just any city. It was known for its violence and crime. It was one of the most dangerous places in America. Being from a small, quiet town in the Midwest, I felt like I had been thrown into a chaotic storm. Anxiety hit me like a truck. The constant worry, the fear of the unknown, it all weighed heavily on me and began to undermine the foundation of our marriage. It wasn't easy for Amanda either. She was deeply immersed in her doctoral program, and the pressure of it all was wearing her down. She had to travel to a remote part of the world to complete her degree. I won't reveal the details for privacy, and she had to leave for a full 3 months. I can't explain how difficult this was for me. Communication with her was sparse, just 1 call a week if I was lucky. It seemed like I was losing my mind. We had been together since we were 18, and we had never been so far apart before. Even worse was the fact that I was stuck in a city that only added to my anxiety. She left in October and didn't come back until February, and those months felt like an eternity. The first red flag hit me the day she got back. We hadn't been intimate for months, obviously, and when we were finally in bed together, Amanda made requests that threw me off completely. Now, let me tell you, we didn't exactly have a vanilla intimate life to begin with, but what she asked for. It was out of the blue, like nothing we had ever done before. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It gnawed at me that whole night. So, later on, I sat her down and asked her straight up if she had cheated on me while she was away. I couldn't shake the feeling that these new ideas she had were coming from somewhere, or someone else. Amanda denied it, of course. She told me she'd found some online guy who talked about ways to spice up intimacy, and that's where her new ideas came from. She even showed me the guy's page, trying to convince me that it was harmless. At the time, I believed her. I loved Amanda, and love has a funny way of blinding you to the truth. I put those doubts aside and told myself I was just being paranoid. Fast forward to April of this year, and things seemed better. Or at least I thought they were. I'd worked hard on managing my anxiety, trying to adjust to the city's harsh environment. Our marriage appeared to have weathered the worst of the storm. We weren't fighting as much, and though our intimate life wasn't as frequent as I would have liked, it was still happening regularly enough. I started to believe we had gotten past the tough years and were heading towards smoother waters. Then came the wedding. My best friend from high school, Matt, 26 years old, was getting married back in the Midwest, near my hometown. He was marrying his longtime girlfriend, and Amanda and I flew out to attend the wedding. It felt good to be back in familiar territory, surrounded by family and old friends. While we were at the wedding, Amanda met one of Matt's college buddies, Kyle, 28 years old. Kyle and Amanda hit it off right away, bonding over their shared love of music. I noticed them talking throughout the reception. I'll admit I felt a little weird about it, but I figured it was harmless. I went up to introduce myself as Amanda's husband, and Kyle seemed like a nice enough guy. They kept chatting here and there as different songs played, but it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. Eventually, we left the reception, and I drove us to our hotel a couple of hours away since we had an early flight out the next morning. About a week later, we were back home, settling into our routine again. I walked into the kitchen one afternoon, just minding my own business, when I noticed Amanda's phone lighting up on the counter. It was a Snapchat notification. From Kyle. A sharp, uncomfortable feeling twisted in my gut. I couldn't help but think it was odd that they were still in contact. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying they were just friends who bonded over their shared music taste. I tried to swallow that uncomfortable feeling, telling myself that I was being ridiculous. Once again, I put my trust in Amanda, even though deep down, something wasn't sitting right. I guess that's love for you. Sometimes it makes you ignore the warning signs staring you right in the face. Mother's Day started off like any other day. No warning, no signs of what was about to happen. Everything seemed normal. Amanda and I hadn't had any major issues or arguments for months. In fact, we'd been intimate that very morning. She seemed fine, happy even, before she got up, kissed me goodbye, and left for lunch with her family. Her dad and grandma lived nearby, so she went to see them, but here's the kicker. She didn't ask me to come. Now that alone was enough to make my stomach churn a little. Sure, I knew Amanda's father and I didn't exactly get along. He'd never liked me, and I wasn't all that fond of him either. So I told myself that was the reason. Maybe it was just a family thing. Maybe she wanted some time with her dad and grandma without the awkward tension I sometimes brought into the room. I pushed the discomfort away, like I had so many times before. A few hours later, Amanda came home. She was calm, collected, and then she dropped a bomb that shattered everything. "We need to talk," she said, her voice serious, her eyes avoiding mine. I felt the blood drain from my face before she even said the words that would change my life forever. "I want a divorce, Jake. I'm not happy." It felt like the air was sucked out of the room. My chest tightened, and my mind went blank. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Not today of all days. I spent the next 20, maybe 30 minutes frantically trying to salvage whatever was left of our relationship. I was desperate, offering up ideas like marriage counseling or even a trial separation. I thought if I could just get her to agree to try something, we could fix it. But she wouldn't budge. Amanda was done. It was like she had made up her mind long before she even spoke the words. And then, out of sheer frustration, I blurted out the one thing that had been gnawing at me for years. "Unless you've cheated, we can fix this, Amanda. We can fix anything unless you've cheated." For me, that was the line in the sand. Cheating was something I could never come back from. Trust, once broken, is broken forever. You can't rebuild what's been burned to ashes. That's when she broke down, her face crumpling into a mess of tears and sobs. Hysterical, uncontrollable sobbing. She didn't have to say the words. I knew. I knew right then that Amanda had betrayed me, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. As the truth spilled out between her sobs, the pieces of our life together began to fall apart in front of me. Remember those strange, out-of-left-field intimate requests when she came back from her remote trip? I was right to question them. Amanda had been with someone else while she was gone. Actually, she'd been with several people. The revelation was like a punch to the gut, leaving me gasping for air. But it didn't stop there. No, it got worse. Amanda confessed that she'd known she wanted out of our marriage ever since she returned from that trip. But instead of telling me the truth, instead of letting me go, she stayed. For 2 more years, she stayed in our home, sharing my bed, pretending everything was okay, all so she could live comfortably. She wanted the nice life, the nice car, the one that was leased under my name, of course. She kept me in the dark, using me to maintain her lifestyle while she secretly checked out of our marriage. I couldn't take it. I told her to pack a bag and leave. The words came out of me with an icy calm I didn't recognize. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just shut down. She left, and I did too for a while. I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and drove. I wasn't even sure where I was going. I ended up in an empty parking lot, and that's when the weight of everything hit me like a tidal wave. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It all came crashing down, and for the first time in my life, I cried like I've never cried before. In the middle of my breakdown, my phone rang. It was my brother Tyler, reminding me to call Mom for Mother's Day. The second he heard the broken sound of my sobs, he hung up and immediately called our dad. Within minutes, my dad was on the phone, and I found myself telling him everything. Saying it out loud, hearing my own voice crack under the weight of it all, made the reality sink in even deeper. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, and I could barely get them out without breaking down again. After what felt like hours, I pulled myself together and went home. Amanda was gone, as I had asked. She'd packed her things and left, leaving behind the ghost of our marriage. 2 weeks passed in a blur. I could barely focus at work, so I spoke to my boss about taking a leave of absence. I needed to get out of that city, out of that life, and just breathe. I went back to the Midwest to stay with my family, hoping to find some clarity, some version of myself that existed outside of being Amanda's husband. That's when the final nail in the coffin came. While I was back home, I found out the truth about Amanda and Kyle. The so-called friend she'd met at Matt's wedding? Yeah, she was sleeping with him. But it didn't stop there. Within a week of our breakup, Amanda had flown out to the Midwest to be with him. They were together, flaunting their relationship on social media for the world to see. Pictures of them laughing, holding each other, like our marriage had never even mattered. The betrayal stung like nothing I had ever felt before. I had loved Amanda with everything I had, and yet here she was, already moved on, already starting a new life while I was still picking up the shattered pieces of mine. It was like a knife to my heart, twisting deeper every time I saw another post, another picture of her and Kyle living the life I thought was ours. That pain, it cut me to my core. I'm in a much better place than I was a few months ago. There are still days when the hurt hits me so hard, it feels like I can't breathe, like someone's squeezing my chest and won't let go. But most days I manage. I'm doing okay. After everything Amanda put me through, we somehow agreed on an amicable divorce. I know. Sounds ridiculous, right? But I told her she could keep the car, all the money we had in the bank, everything, as long as she didn't touch my retirement account. I couldn't afford to lose that too. So I had to start over financially. It's been a long process, a brutal one, but slowly I'm finding my footing again. Stability is creeping back into my life, little by little. Thankfully, we didn't have any kids. We had always planned to wait until Amanda finished grad school before starting a family, and for that, I'm eternally grateful now. The thought of being tied to her through children after everything that happened, it sends a chill down my spine. At least now I can move on without that burden hanging over me. The divorce isn't final just yet. We're still waiting for the courts to process everything. It feels like this chapter of my life is dragging on, but I know the end is in sight. I've accepted a new job back in the Midwest, about 2.5 hours from my family. Honestly, I needed the fresh start more than anything. I've been stuck in that violent, anxiety-ridden city for the past 3.5 years, and it has been nothing short of a nightmare. Between my mental health struggles and the collapse of my marriage, it was the worst period of my life. I'll admit, I wasn't a perfect husband. Far from it. I had my faults, my anxiety, my doubts, but I never stopped trying to be better. For her. For us. I never lied. I never cheated. I never raised my hand or my voice in anger. I gave her everything I had for the entire 8.5 years we were together. And in the end, it wasn't enough. Maybe it never was. The reason I'm writing this now is because I need some kind of closure. I need to get it all out of my head, out of my heart, and maybe, just maybe, it'll help me finally move on. And I want to ask anyone out there who has been through something similar. How do you learn to trust again? Because that's where I'm stuck. No matter how much time passes, no matter how much better I feel, every time I try to get to know someone new, I can't stop wondering, how is this woman going to screw me over? My biggest dream in life is to be a father. I've wanted that for as long as I can remember. But now, every time I think about building a future with someone, I freeze. All I can picture is them betraying me the way Amanda did. I've been going to therapy ever since the divorce process started, and it's helped in so many ways. But it hasn't helped with this. This fear, this feeling that I'll never be able to trust anyone again. I don't know how to let that go. I'm Jake, a 29-year-old guy, and I've been dating my girlfriend, Emily, since July 10th, 2019. We were both young when we met, but I thought we had something special. Everything felt solid until early March 2022, when she landed her first full-time office job. That's when things started to shift, though I didn't realize it at first. There was this guy, Chris, in her office, same position as her. He was single, always flirting with her, cracking jokes that had everyone laughing, including her. I never quite had that charm or that effortless humor he did, and Emily made sure to remind me of that. She mentioned to me in mid-March that she was attracted to him. I remember it so clearly. We were sitting in her car after dinner. She said she had feelings for him, but quickly followed up with, "Don't worry, Jake. I love you. I'll never act on it." I tried to believe her, but a knot of doubt was forming inside me. By early April, I had to leave for another city to work on a project that would keep me away for 2 or 3 weeks. During this time, we still talked, but our conversations were strained. They lasted only 15 to 20 minutes, and every time the topic circled back to Chris. It was the same thing over and over, her confusion, her attraction to him, but also her insistence that she wasn't going to leave me. I was losing patience. I asked her repeatedly, "If something's happening, just tell me. Don't string me along. I don't want to be stuck in this mess." But she always said the same thing. Nothing was going on. She was just confused. She assured me she wouldn't leave me or pursue anything with him. But I wasn't convinced. One of her co-workers, Sarah, who I'd occasionally talk to, painted a different picture. She told me that Emily and Chris were always together, sitting close, holding hands when they thought no one was looking, even sneaking off to make out behind the water cooler during breaks. I was devastated, furious, but I didn't want to believe it. When I confronted Emily, she looked me in the eyes and told me Sarah was lying. Why would she lie? I asked, desperate for something solid. But in the end, I believed Emily. I wanted to. I decided to finish my project early and surprise her. After a grueling 14-hour journey, I arrived at her office right when she was supposed to be leaving. I had imagined a warm, joyful reunion, her running into my arms, excited to see me. But when she saw me standing there, her face didn't light up with joy. Instead, she looked irritated, almost angry. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just a bad day. She usually took the bus home with 2 of her co-workers, so I joined them. I tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes, saying random things to make her smile, but she wasn't even looking at me. The odd thing was, everyone else on the bus, even strangers, were chuckling at my dumb jokes. But not her. Emily seemed to be in her own world, closed off, as if my presence was an annoyance. After that awkward ride, we went for a walk. I reached out to hold her hand, just something to feel close to her. But she pulled away. That hurt. When I tried again, she snapped, telling me she was disgusted by me for trying to hold her hand when she clearly didn't want to. I felt like I was walking on eggshells around her, unsure of what had changed so drastically. I returned home, but things kept spiraling. Over the next 2 weeks, she yelled at me, insulted me, and constantly berated me. I just wanted clarity. Either she was with me or she wasn't. But every time I pushed for an answer, she'd say she was confused, that she didn't want to leave me. But I was starting to feel like a shadow in her life, not her partner. We had a trip planned for her architectural thesis, a 5-day visit to a site she needed to study. We'd booked everything months ago, and I wasn't about to back out. So we went. At first, things seemed better. The train ride was pleasant, even fun, and we were actually getting along. By the time we reached the hotel, it felt like we might actually get past this rough patch. We started making out the moment we got into the room, and for a moment I thought we were back to being us. But just as I was opening the condom wrapper, she stopped me. "Jake," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I kissed him." It felt like my world crumbled right there. I pulled back, stunned, heart pounding. "What?" I barely managed to ask. And then she said the words that shattered me. "I made out with him." Multiple times. Even the day before we left for this trip. I didn't know what to say. She cried, apologizing, repeating over and over that it was a mistake, that she'd never do it again. After hours of arguing, somehow, against my better judgment, I convinced myself to let it go. We agreed not to bring it up during the trip, and, surprisingly, those 5 days were okay. We had fun, avoided the elephant in the room, and pretended for a while that everything was fine. But once we got home, the reality crashed back in. The fighting resumed. She would insult me, compare me to him, make me feel worthless. And yet, we couldn't seem to stay apart for more than a day or two before falling back into this toxic cycle. Then came April 29th, 2022. I was getting ready to see Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, a movie I'd been excited about for months. I was almost out the door when she called. Her voice was trembling. "Jake, I kissed him again." That was it. Something in me snapped. For the first time in our entire relationship, I yelled at her. I told her I was done. I hung up, blocked her on everything, and left for the movie. But even sitting in the theater, my phone kept buzzing, her name flashing on the screen over and over. I couldn't focus. Halfway through the movie, before the climax even began, I stormed out, yelling into the phone, trying to drown out her sobbing voice, telling me it was a mistake, that she would fix everything. But I wasn't sure if anything could be fixed anymore. Emily and I had been through so many ups and downs by this point that I wasn't sure what was left to fight for. After our last big argument, she told me, in no uncertain terms, "If you're done, if you can't handle this anymore, just walk away, Jake. I won't stop you. I won't beg you to stay." And that's what hit me the hardest. She had always begged before, cried before, but this time there was a strange finality in her words. She didn't say it out of frustration or spite. It was as though she'd finally accepted that things might be over, and she was giving me an out. But I didn't take it. I don't know why, but I didn't. After hours of tense back and forth, I agreed to try again. This time, things seemed different. For the first time in months, everything smoothed out. Emily became so affectionate, showing me all the love I had been craving. It was like she was making up for every hurtful word, every betrayal. She was sweet, caring, doing whatever she could to rebuild the trust we had lost. I wanted to believe her. I really did. And for a while I thought we were healing. I noticed the changes in her efforts to make things right. Maybe this time was different. But of course, nothing is ever as easy as it seems. Exactly 15 days later, on May 22nd, 2022, she had an important interview lined up. The only problem? The interview was far away, and her parents wouldn't let her go alone. To make matters worse, none of her friends were available to help out. The only person who could take her was, of course, Chris, the guy who had been haunting our relationship like a shadow I couldn't shake. Emily called me asking if I was okay with it. "I can cancel if you're uncomfortable," she said. "It's just an interview. I won't go if it's going to cause problems." I could have said no. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. I told her it was fine. She left with him that morning. I didn't call her during the interview. I figured she was probably in the middle of it, and I didn't want to distract her. But as time passed, way beyond when the interview should have ended, my gut started to twist. Something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So I texted one of her co-workers and asked for Chris's number. I called him. When he picked up, I got the answer I had been dreading. The interview had ended over an hour ago, and the two of them were at KFC casually grabbing lunch. My stomach sank. I called Emily next. She answered, but the conversation was brief, just 5 minutes. She didn't sound like herself, but I chalked it up to nerves from the interview. Still, something about the way she said goodbye, that hurried tone in her voice, gnawed at me. That night, when she got home, we talked on the phone again. She told me Chris had dropped her off, and that was that. It seemed like nothing, but the unease I felt wouldn't go away. Fast forward to today, June 15th, 2024. It had been 2 years since all of that happened, and somehow, we had managed to build a peaceful life together again. I'd convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, we were finally past everything. That was until Emily blindsided me with a question. "Would it matter if I told you something I haven't told you before?" she asked, her voice oddly calm. "What do you mean?" "What haven't you told me?" I asked, my pulse already quickening. "It's about Chris." I could feel the blood drain from my face. "What?" I said, my voice rising, already furious. She hesitated for a moment, and then, with the same cold honesty that had gutted me time and again, she confessed. "When he dropped me off that day, 2 years ago, we went upstairs. And we made out. It was in the heat of the moment." The heat of the moment? What the hell is it with her and this so-called heat of the moment? My blood was boiling, my heart racing, and all I could think was that this wasn't some slip-up or accident. She wanted it. She let it happen. "And now you're telling me this? After 2 years?" I shouted. My voice was trembling, my hands shaking. She tried to explain, saying she felt guilty, and that's why she was finally confessing. "Jake, it was so long ago. Why does it even matter now? We've moved past this, haven't we? It's been 2 years. 2 years. 2 years I had been trying to trust her, trying to rebuild something that had already been shattered. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, it was in the deceit, the fact that she had kept this from me for so long, pretending everything was fine. "It's about trust, Emily. Trust. And you broke that again." I was shaking with anger, my voice raw. She didn't get it. She never did. All she said was that she couldn't see why it mattered now. But it mattered to me. It was always going to matter to me. I couldn't talk to her anymore. I needed space. I told her not to contact me, not to poke at this wound any further. And you know what she did? She blocked me. Now here I am, wondering how the hell we got here and what I'm supposed to do next. Do I keep fighting for something that feels broken beyond repair? Or do I finally walk away like I should have done a long time ago? Hi there, everyone. My story begins when I was about 29 years old and she was 23. We met at a party, one of those casual gatherings where you don't expect much to happen, but something did. From the moment our eyes met, there was this undeniable connection. It wasn't a setup. No, we met through mutual friends, but I had always stayed far away from setups. I like to let things happen naturally, without the pressure of expectations from family or friends. Funny enough, she actually worked with my mom at the time. My mom had even mentioned her once or twice trying to play matchmaker. Of course, I brushed it off. I had a strict no setups rule, wanting to meet someone on my own terms. It was ironic that we crossed paths anyway, without anyone orchestrating it. Around the time we started dating, I was in the middle of buying my first house, a big step I was pretty excited about. After about a year of dating, I asked her to move in with me. I already knew I was going to marry her, but I was just waiting for the right moment to propose. And as fate would have it, that moment came when I had a business trip to New York City towards the end of summer. I figured what better place to pop the question than at the top of the Empire State Building. So on a beautiful night, overlooking the city lights, I asked her to be my wife. A year later, we were married in a ceremony that felt like a dream. Life seemed perfect, though it had its complications. She had a full-time job, but it didn't pay much, and she had big plans. She wanted to get her master's degree, and she wasn't one to waste time. So the first 3 anniversaries of our marriage were spent apart, with her overseas completing an immersive graduate program that allowed her to continue working. She was a teacher, which made sense with her dedication. I saw it as a chance for her to grow, and for me, well, I got to ease into married life without too many disruptions. Summers were always her busy season, so while she was away, I threw myself into my own passion, golf. It became my escape. The golf season in our area was short, maybe 5 months if you were lucky, so I made the most of it. I was on the course almost every chance I got. In the evenings, after a long day of playing, I would come home and we'd talk on the phone. The time difference was tricky. While it was evening for me, it was early morning for her. But we still managed to talk every couple of days, keeping that connection alive despite the distance. During one of our calls in her 3rd and final year of graduate school, something shifted. She mentioned that we needed to have a talk when she got back home. That small statement sent a wave of anxiety through me. My mind immediately raced to the worst conclusions. Was something wrong? Was there something I needed to brace myself for? I couldn't help but wonder if there was another guy involved, if somehow the distance had created room for someone else to step in. So, with my heart pounding, I asked her straight up if our talk had anything to do with someone else. She laughed it off and denied it, saying she just missed me and wanted us to spend some quality time together when she got back, time to catch up on everything she'd missed while being away. I wanted to believe her. I did trust her, and she had never given me a reason to doubt her before. So I tucked that nagging worry into the back of my mind, leaving it there to simmer quietly. Not forgotten, but certainly not at the forefront either. When she finally came home, things were exactly as she said they'd be. We spent hours talking, making up for the time lost during those long months apart. We reconnected in every way possible, physically and emotionally. Her overseas studies were finally behind her, and for the first time in years we could start focusing on the future, together. It felt like we had hit this milestone, and now we could talk about building a family, something we had both been excited about for a while. The idea of having children, raising them, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. It was a dream that was finally within reach. Fast forward about 15 years, and that dream became our reality. We had 3 beautiful children, 2 daughters and a son. Life was busy, chaotic even, but it was full. However, during these years, something else crept into our lives, something we didn't expect. Her health began to decline. It started small, episodes that we couldn't quite explain. After years of uncertainty, she was diagnosed with epilepsy. The diagnosis hit us hard, but the real blow came when the doctors told us she needed surgery, that they had to remove the affected part of her brain. It was one of the most stressful times of my life. Our kids were still young, and they didn't understand what was happening. I was working long hours trying to keep everything together while also making sure she knew I was there for her. I kept telling her, "It's going to be okay," even when I wasn't sure myself. The surgery was terrifying, the stakes high, but thankfully, it went as well as we could have hoped. Months of recovery followed, and slowly but surely she began to heal. When she finally got cleared to drive again, it was like a part of her spirit had been restored. She was eager to reconnect with friends, to get back to the life that had been put on hold for so long. It felt like a new chapter for us, one where we could breathe a little easier, even though the scars, both physical and emotional, were still there. Not long after her surgery and recovery, she started going out more often with her sisters to these house parties hosted by a close friend. It was mostly casual, and she would almost always ask me to join. But to be honest, I wasn't always in the mood for it. The idea of staying out late, only to have to come home and then take the babysitter back, knowing I wouldn't be in bed until nearly half an hour after she was, didn't appeal to me every time. Still, whenever I did go, I had a great time. I'd usually end up reconnecting with a buddy who worked in a similar field as me. We'd talk about work, sports, and drink a ridiculous amount of beer. It was fun, no doubt about that. But I didn't always have the energy for it. One weekend, she was getting ready for one of these parties, and I couldn't help but notice something different about her. She was wearing new lingerie, a bra and panties that I hadn't seen before. It caught me off guard. I casually asked her, "What's the occasion?" She smiled and said she was just tired of wearing the same old underwear and wanted to feel good about herself for a change. Given everything she'd been through with her health, it made sense. She had dealt with a life-altering diagnosis, undergone surgery, and now she was just trying to enjoy herself again. I could understand that. She wanted to feel pretty, to feel alive again. I wasn't going to question that. Then she asked if I was planning to join her at the party. Honestly, I thought it might be nice to go this time, spend some time with her without the kids demanding our attention. I told her I was up for it. But then she surprised me by saying that I didn't really need to go if I wasn't feeling up to it. She explained that this particular party was going to be smaller, mostly just the girls hanging out, drinking, and talking. I thought about it, and, in the end, I agreed to stay home with the kids so she could have some time to herself with her friends. But by 2 a.m., she still wasn't home. I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Panic started to creep in. My mind raced to all the worst-case scenarios. Had she gotten too drunk and crashed her car? Had something happened on the way home? I couldn't sit around any longer, so I grabbed my keys, jumped into the car, and headed toward her friend's place. Just as I was driving down the street, I saw her car coming from the opposite direction. Relieved, but still fuming, I turned around and followed her back home. When we walked inside, my worry quickly turned into anger. "What the hell happened?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She shrugged it off, saying her phone had died and she'd just lost track of time. But it didn't sit right with me. I told her it was irresponsible. We had young kids at home. What if something had happened to one of them while she was out and unreachable? Or worse, what if something had happened to her? She brushed me off, saying I was overreacting and that we should just go to bed. But I couldn't let it go. Not that easily. The next morning, I was still angry, but part of me wanted to believe that it was just an honest mistake. Maybe she really had lost track of time. Maybe the fun had just carried her away, and her phone really was dead. So I let it go, telling myself not to blow things out of proportion. Life went on, as it always did. But there was something that lingered beneath the surface, an uneasiness I couldn't quite shake. A few weeks after that late-night episode, life was trudging along as usual. One night, during the middle of the week, we were in bed. I was absolutely wiped out. Between working all day and then coming home to wrangle the kids, I barely had the energy to keep my eyes open. If you've got multiple kids, you get it. It's like a marathon, and by the time I hit the bed, sleep was the only thing I could think about. She, on the other hand, seemed wide awake. She was lying next to me, phone in hand, tapping away and giggling every so often. I assumed she was texting a friend. It wasn't unusual. She was always texting someone. But this time, something felt different. After a few more giggles, my curiosity got the best of me, and I asked, "What's so funny?" She gave me a quick, dismissive response. "Oh, nothing." But I wasn't satisfied. The way she was acting made me feel off. So, I asked if I could see her phone, just to know what was so funny. That's when everything shifted. She tensed up, her face hardening as she closed her phone with a snap. "It's none of your business," she said, turning off the light and rolling over as if that would end the conversation. My mind started racing, alarm bells ringing in the back of my head. This was out of character for her, and something about it made my stomach turn. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So with my heart pounding, I asked her point blank, "Are you having an affair?" She laughed, a laugh that was too light, too forced, and said, Of course not. Her reaction felt off, but despite the gnawing unease, I let it go. I trusted her after all. We'd been through so much together, and I wanted to believe that I was overthinking things, that this was just a weird moment, not a sign of something darker. So I dropped it. But that uneasiness, it stayed, lingering like a shadow over everything. A couple of months passed, and we took a family trip to Texas. Things between us hadn't really changed. She was still going out to those parties with her friends, and I still wasn't joining her most of the time. But on the surface, things seemed fine. Texas was a nice escape. We had a great time with the kids, enjoying the sights, the food, and just being together as a family. For those few days, it felt like everything was back to normal. When we finally got home, I felt a sense of relief. It was good to be back, to settle into the familiar routine again. I went downstairs to my man cave, throwing on the TV while I waited for the laundry to finish. It was one of those peaceful, quiet moments, the kind where you could just zone out and let the exhaustion wash over you. But that peace didn't last long. She came downstairs, her face serious. "We need to talk," she said. I was instantly irritated. We had just spent 5 days together on vacation, with plenty of opportunities to talk if she wanted to. What could be so urgent now? I know she could see the frustration in my face, but that didn't stop her from dropping the bomb. "I'm having an affair," she said, the words falling like a hammer, shattering whatever sense of normalcy I had left. My heart froze. My stomach twisted. For a second, I just stared at her, not fully comprehending what she had just said. I couldn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. "Who?" I asked, my voice shaking, my mind desperately trying to piece together who could have been involved. It took me 2 guesses, and then it hit me like a freight train. It was him, my old friend, the one from those parties, the one she kept going to without me, the one I had reconnected with while talking about work and sports, the one who I thought was just another buddy. The betrayal was almost unbearable, like a weight crushing down on my chest. All those times I brushed aside my suspicions, trusted her when things felt off. It all came crashing down in that moment. It was the kind of humiliation that seeps into every corner of your life, like a poison you can't escape. The worst part was knowing that the guy, my so-called friend, was probably bragging about it to his buddies and coworkers. I could picture it. Him smirking, sharing the details of his conquest while everyone else laughed behind my back. The realization hit me hard. I was the fool in the story. I was the cuckold. The anger surged through me, and I couldn't bear to stay in the house any longer. I told her to leave, to pack her things and go, but she crossed her arms and stood her ground. "This house is just as much mine as it is yours," she said. And technically, she was right. But I couldn't be there. Not with her. Not after knowing what she'd done. I made the decision to leave, to walk away from everything. But she grabbed my arm and begged me not to go. She didn't want the kids to know something was wrong, to have their world shattered because of her affair. It was hard to focus on her words through the haze of anger and betrayal swirling in my mind. But there was one question I had to ask. Was there anyone else? Before him? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time she'd crossed the line. Her answer made me feel sick. "I kissed a guy during one of my summers overseas," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a confession, but I wasn't buying it. I might have been blind, but I wasn't stupid. This was back when we were newly married, when she had been overseas for those immersive graduate programs. She used to drink more back then, a bit of wine turning her wild, loosening the boundaries she claimed to hold dear. A kiss? I knew it was more than that. Kissing probably meant sex, and there was no way she'd admit to it unless she knew she couldn't keep hiding it anymore. The pit in my stomach deepened as I started connecting the dots. This affair hadn't just sprung up out of nowhere. It had been festering for months, at least 6, probably longer. I felt foolish for not seeing the signs, for trusting her when I should have been more suspicious. The late nights at her friend's house, the new lingerie, the way she had brushed off my questions. It all made sense now. I looked at her, my voice trembling with disbelief. "Are you going to move in with him?" Her face changed, and she looked down. "He ended it when I told him I confessed." And then I saw it. A single tear sliding down her cheek. Was it shame? Or was it grief for losing the guy who had been using her all along? It didn't matter anymore. She wasn't crying for me or for what we had built together. She wasn't crying for our marriage. I couldn't stand the sight of her anymore. My mind was in a tailspin, and I felt like I was drowning. The weight of her betrayal was too much to bear. I packed a bag, my hands shaking, and I asked her one last question. "How could you do this? How could you love me and still break our vows like it meant nothing?" Her response was a cold, calculated dagger straight to the heart. "I don't know if I ever really loved you." That was it. The final blow. The life we had built. The years we had spent together. The children. The memories. It all felt like a lie. I left the house that night, unable to look back. And soon after, I left the marriage, too. After everything fell apart, I bought a house just a couple of miles from what had been my home. I wanted to stay close to the kids. They were my only anchor in all the chaos. But even though I moved out, I couldn't completely escape her. We had to co-parent, and that meant dealing with her whether I liked it or not. And believe me, I didn't. I avoided her as much as I could, keeping interactions limited to the bare necessities about the kids. It wasn't easy, though. There was no way to cut her out entirely. Then came COVID. I got hit hard, really hard. It knocked me out for a solid month, and there were times when I genuinely thought I wouldn't make it. I was so weak that even getting out of bed felt like an impossible task. The days blurred together, and I was constantly teetering on the edge of despair, thinking that this might actually be it. Eventually, I recovered, but the aftermath lingered. The fatigue never really went away. I was constantly exhausted, barely able to function outside of work. All I could do when I got home was collapse into bed and sleep. It was like my body had forgotten what it felt like to be normal, and I thought that was the worst it could get. But I was wrong. Not long after recovering from COVID, I got hit with another blow. Cancer. It was a sucker punch I didn't see coming. The doctors caught it early, which was the only silver lining, but I still had to go through surgery, chemo, and radiation. The whole ordeal dragged on for months. It was brutal, but I made it through. I came out the other side thinner, weaker, but still standing. And weirdly enough, despite everything, I hadn't felt this good in years. I'd lost a lot of weight I needed to lose, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a bit of control over my life. During all of this, she showed up, bringing soup, offering help, doing all the things someone might do for an ex who's sick. But every time she brought me food or checked in on me, it felt like salt in the wound. Part of me resented her being there. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was her way of trying to make up for the hell she'd put me through. She was the one who had torn my world apart, and now she wanted to play the caregiver? I wasn't having it. The truth is, after the affairs, after everything, I'd been suicidal for a while. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the complete collapse of everything I thought my life was. There were dark days where I seriously didn't want to go on. And even now, a decade later, the depression still lingers. There are moments when it creeps back in, and I think about how much easier it would be if I wasn't around. But I manage. I've been on my own for the last 10 years, and single for the last 9. In a lot of ways, my life is better now. I've got good friends, the kind you can golf with, throw back some beers, and just laugh about life. I've got my dog, my faithful companion who sleeps in my bed most nights. She's loyal. Though I've noticed that when one of the kids comes home from college, she'll ditch me and sleep with them instead. I guess I'll always be second fiddle, but that's fine. It's a small price to pay for a little companionship. Still, there's a sense of loss that I can't shake. The future I thought I'd have, growing old with my wife, spending more time with the kids as they got older, and enjoying retirement, that's all gone now. It's like trying to grasp at vapor. I see the kids, of course, but things aren't the same. My finances never recovered from the divorce, and retirement, that's just a distant fantasy at this point. Not for her, though. No, she got the house. She got the child support. Meanwhile, I'm left to struggle, just trying to make ends meet month after month. It's funny, though. Even with everything she took, what I miss most isn't the house or the money. It's the trust, the ability to believe in someone again. I've decided I'll never be in another serious relationship. I can't. The price is too steep, and the trust, well, that's gone. The thought of letting someone else in, only to be burned again, is too much to even consider. I'll never be able to trust a woman like that again. Not after what she did. My wife Emily and I met online about 10 years ago, back when dating apps were just starting to become the norm. We hit it off almost immediately, like we'd known each other for years rather than days. Fast forward 8 years, and here we are, married with 2 young children, a house of our own, and the kind of bond I'd always hoped to find, but never thought was possible. Before meeting her, neither of us had really had any serious, long-term relationships. Sure, we dated, but nothing that came close to what we have now. We're partners in every sense of the word. We've faced challenges like everyone else, but we've always worked through them, especially when it came to our finances, which was a rough spot for us in the beginning. But we communicate. We're a team, one unit, and we always have each other's backs. Or at least, that's how it felt, until recently. Here's the thing about Emily. She's always been clear about being straight, and I've never questioned that. But her style, her vibe, it has this kind of, I don't know, it gives off an energy. People might look at her and think she's into women, but that never bothered me. It's just how she is. She's confident, edgy, doesn't fit into any neat box. I love that about her. But Emily has this habit of pushing the limits when it comes to joking around, especially at work. Her workplace is like a free-for-all when it comes to humor. Lots of inappropriate jokes, even stuff of a sexual nature, the kind of banter that would get me fired on the spot if I ever tried it at my job. But for her, it's just how things are in that environment. I've always trusted her. Never gave it a second thought. That is, until she met someone new at work a few weeks ago. Her name is Rachel. From the moment Rachel came into the picture, I couldn't stop hearing about her. Rachel's hilarious, Emily would say, or, you know, Rachel's kid is in our son's class at school, or, Rachel just sent me the funniest message, she's so cool. It was Rachel this, Rachel that. Over time, I found out Rachel's married. To another woman, no less, and they have at least one kid together. On the surface, it seemed harmless. Rachel was just a new friend, right? But something about the way Emily lit up when she talked about her, how often Rachel came up in conversation, it started gnawing at me. Last night, Emily was working late, and I was home alone with the kids. I went to plug in the iPad to charge, which is connected to her phone, so her messages pop up there, too. I didn't think much of it until I saw a notification from an unknown number. The message wasn't the usual playful banter I'd seen before. This one was different. It was emotional. Whoever this was, they were gushing about Emily, her personality, her looks, like they were seeing her through rose-colored glasses. My gut twisted. This didn't feel like a joke. I tried to brush it off, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the thread. What I found left me reeling. It was Rachel, of course. And they weren't just chatting. Something had happened between them. The messages hinted at a physical encounter earlier that day, something that made Emily set a boundary. But as I scrolled through, I saw that the conversation didn't end there. They were flirting, and Emily was the one asking if they could move that boundary. She even mentioned that she wished she had met Rachel before me or before we had kids. I felt my heart drop. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Was this really happening? I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew I needed proof. So I took pictures of the messages with my phone. I wasn't exactly tech-savvy enough to figure out how to send the screenshots from the iPad without Emily finding out. Then I started texting her, trying to play it cool. I asked how her day was, what she'd been up to. I needed to see if she'd tell me anything. Slowly, bits and pieces came out. She admitted she'd spent the morning with Rachel, at our house, alone. They had talked about work issues, Rachel's marriage problems, stuff she never usually talked about with anyone, let alone someone she'd just met. Emily never invites people over without telling me. If she does, she's always excited and wants to share it with me. But this time, nothing. She hadn't mentioned a word about it until I asked. I couldn't take it anymore. The tension was suffocating. I decided to confront her. I texted, "I'm about to start asking some very real questions, and you better have a very good answer." I added that I'd charge the iPad for her when she got home. Almost instantly, I saw the iPad light up with her response. But then another message appeared. This time, to Rachel. She had taken a screenshot of my message to her and sent it to Rachel with the words, "We're done." Rachel replied, confused, asking what was going on. Emily's response was short and to the point. "He knows. He's seen everything on the iPad." Then, finally, she texted me. She asked if she could call in a few minutes once she found a quiet spot at work. My blood was boiling at that point. I told her not to bother calling, and I made arrangements for her to sleep in the basement when she got home. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I feel completely numb. It's like my mind is stuck on an endless loop, replaying everything over and over again. Last night, I didn't get a wink of sleep. How could I? My head was swirling with a million thoughts, questions, doubts, anger, sadness. None of it made any sense. How could this happen to us? To her? To our family? This morning, I finally sat down with Emily in the quiet hours before the kids woke up. The tension was suffocating. I told her that we need to face this head on, that this isn't something we can sweep under the rug. I suggested marriage counseling because, honestly, I don't know how to fix this on my own. We need help, someone who knows how to navigate this kind of mess. I asked her the question that had been eating away at me. Why? Why did she do this? She had no answer. Nothing. She sat there staring at her hands, mumbling things like, "I don't know," and "It wasn't you. It's not anything you did." She swore up and down that she's happy with her life, happy with me, and yet she couldn't explain why she crossed that line. She told me they only kissed, nothing more. But I know from those messages that she was pushing for more, even if she won't admit it. I poured my heart out to her, told her how shattered I felt, how betrayed. And all I got in return were a few weak sorries and, "I know you're hurting." She didn't have much else to say, which only made it worse. It felt like she didn't even know what to say to me, like she was as numb as I was. She kept saying she was embarrassed. But I told her she wasn't embarrassed for what she did. She was only embarrassed because she got caught. If she really cared about me or our kids, she wouldn't have let it go that far. Before I left for work this morning, I told her I'm willing to try to work through this, to fix our marriage. But it's going to take time. This isn't something that can be patched up overnight. I reminded her that this wasn't some drunken mistake at a party. It was a Thursday morning, sober. She invited Rachel over minutes after dropping the kids off at school. And after everything, we'd just been intimate that morning. Then she spent the rest of the day flirting with Rachel while texting me things like, "How's your day going?" and "There's dinner for the kids in the fridge." She was literally flirting with Rachel right before and after talking to our kids on FaceTime. I'm angry. So angry. But I'm trying to keep my head straight. I don't want to do anything rash, something I'll regret later. Deep down, I still want to fix this. I'm just not sure how. I've already told her we're going to counseling. I told her she needs to get an STD test, and that this joking around at work needs to stop. She's promised me she's cut off contact with Rachel, outside of professional work interactions. But honestly, how am I supposed to trust that? I haven't told her I've got photos of their messages. She only knows I saw them on the iPad. For now, I'm making her sleep in the basement. But, is this even salvageable? Am I fooling myself? Should I just blow it all up and go scorched earth? I don't want to do that to the kids. It's not fair to them, and they deserve better than a bitter, broken home. Part of me wonders if something is wrong with her. A tumor? A chemical imbalance? Something that explains why she'd do something so out of character. This came out of nowhere, and she seems as confused as I am about why she did it. All she says is that she got curious. But that's not enough for me. I'm also torn about whether I should reach out to Rachel's wife. Part of me thinks she deserves to know, but another part of me doesn't want to bring even more chaos into this. Should I push Emily to come clean to Rachel's wife? Or should I just let it go? Emily's got another late shift tonight, and I'm at work now. We probably won't even see each other again until tomorrow morning. The worst part? We've got a weekend full of kids' birthday parties to get through. I don't know how we're going to pretend everything's fine, but we'll have to. I don't want anyone else to know yet, not until I figure out what the hell to do.